Have you ever been in a meeting where your boss asked you to do something and your whole body tensed up, your gut was screaming, this is wrong, and yet you still heard yourself say, sure, no problem? Welcome to Mind Decoded. I'm Dr. Ann.
And I'm Zach. Dr. Ann, what are we unpacking today?
Zach, we're going to look at a question that has fascinated and unsettled psychologists for decades. Why do perfectly good, decent, ordinary people end up doing things that go against their values?
I feel like I have a short list of answers for that. Weak character, bad upbringing, lack of moral compass.
That's exactly what most people assume, and that assumption is so powerful that when a researcher named Stanley Milgram first designed an experiment to study this in the early 1960s, he asked a group of psychiatrists to predict the results.
What did they say?
They predicted that less than 1% of participants would go all the way. They were convinced that only deeply disturbed individuals would obey authority to the point of causing serious harm to another person.
1%? That's basically nobody. So what actually happened?
When Milgram ran the experiment, 65% of participants went all the way. 2 out of every 3 ordinary people recruited from newspaper ads from all walks of life, teachers, postal workers, engineers, followed orders to the maximum level.
Wait, hold on. 65%? That's not a fringe group of disturbed people. That's most people.
Exactly. And that's the shock of the Milgram experiment, no pun intended. It revealed that the capacity to obey authority isn't something that belongs to a few broken individuals. It is a basic feature of how human social brains are wired.
Okay, I need the full story. What actually happened in this experiment?
So picture this. You respond to an ad for a study on memory and learning at Yale University. You arrive at a lab and you meet a participant, a friendly middle-aged man, and you also meet the experimenter who is wearing a lab coat and looks very official and scientific. The experimenter explains that one of you will be the teacher and one will be the learner. You get assigned to be the teacher. The learner gets strapped into a chair with electrodes attached to his arms.
That sounds alarming right from the start.
It gets more alarming. The experimenter tells you that the study is about the effect of punishment on learning. The learner has to memorize word pairs. Every time he gets an answer wrong, you have to deliver an electric shock. And with each wrong answer, the shock voltage increases 15 volts, 30 volts, up to 450 volts.
450? That sounds potentially dangerous.
The shock generator has clear labels: slight shock, moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, danger severe shock, and finally just 2 letters, full X pol X.
So at what point do normal people stop?
Well, remember, the psychiatrist predicted that basically everyone would stop very early, around the point where the learner starts showing distress. And that does happen for some people. But here's what the experiment really looked like. The experimenter gave a series of prompts. If you hesitated, he would say, please continue. If you hesitated more, the experiment requires that you continue. If you still held back, it is absolutely essential that you continue. And if you outright refused, you have no other choice. You must go on.
And people actually continued after that?
2 out of 3 kept pressing the lever all the way to 450 volts. But here's the part that gets me. The participants were not cold-hearted. They weren't indifferent. The video footage from the experiment is agonizing to watch. Participants were sweating. They were trembling. They were laughing nervously. They were pleading with the experimenter to let them stop. Some had full-blown seizures. But when the experimenter said, you have no choice, you must continue, they kept pressing the button.
Okay, I need to stop here because I can feel myself wanting to say I would never do that. I would walk out. But I also know that every single participant probably thought the same thing before they walked into that room.
That is exactly the self-recognition moment. Every single participant was a normal person who believed they were good, and they were. But the situation was more powerful than their character.
So what was it about the situation that made them do it? Was it the lab coat? Was it Yale University? Was it the fact that the experimenter seemed to know what he was doing?
All of the above. Milgram identified several psychological forces at play, but let me focus on the ones that matter most in our everyday lives. The first is what psychologists call the agentic shift. This is when you move from feeling like you are acting on your own behalf to feeling like you are merely an agent carrying out someone else's wishes. And once you make that shift, responsibility moves too. You start to feel, I'm not responsible for the outcome. I'm just following orders.
That is incredibly familiar. I once had a manager who asked me to fudge some numbers on a report. Nothing illegal, but definitely misleading. And I remember thinking, it's not my call, I'm just doing what I'm told. And afterward, I felt terrible. But in the moment, that shift happened without me even noticing.
That is exactly the agentic shift in action. And once you've made that shift, a second force kicks in, something called incremental escalation. The shocks didn't start at 450 volts. They started at 15, a tiny little jolt that felt completely reasonable. And then the next one was a little stronger, and the next one a little stronger. By the time you're at 300 volts, walking away feels inconsistent with what you just did at 50. You've already committed to this path. Each step feels too small to justify stopping.
Oh, that is devastatingly familiar too. It's like when you're in a toxic work environment and you don't leave. Not because one day was that bad, but because each day was only slightly worse than yesterday. And now you've been there for 2 years, and it's 100 times worse than when you started, and yet walking away feels impossible.
That is a perfect example. And the third force is the authority gradient. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to status cues. The lab coat, the title, the confident tone, the university affiliation. These signals activate a deep shortcut in our brains that says, this person knows what they're doing. I should defer to them.
So our brains are basically running ancient software that was designed for tribal hierarchies. The boss says jump, we're hardwired to ask how high.
That is exactly right. And look, this is not a character flaw, this is a survival mechanism. In evolutionary terms, following the group leader kept you alive. The problem is that this same mechanism works, whether the leader is trustworthy or not.
So where does this leave us? Because on one hand, I feel like I understand myself a little better. On the other hand, I feel like I now have a very uncomfortable mirror held up to my own behavior.
And that discomfort is healthy, because the first step in resisting the authority trap is recognizing that you are vulnerable to it. And I don't mean you personally, Zach. I mean every human being with a normally functioning brain. The moment you think, oh, that would never happen to me, I'm too strong, you become more vulnerable, not less, because you stop looking for the signs.
So what do I actually do with this knowledge? How do I use it?
Let me give you a practical framework. Before you speak at work, learn to distinguish between three different things. First, the request itself. What is being asked of you? Second, your inner signal. What is your gut telling you about this request? And third, the authority presence. Who is asking? And what is the social pressure you feel?
Separate the what from the who from my own feeling.
Yes, and if your gut is saying something is off, take a pause. You can say something as simple as, I'd like a moment to think about that before I respond. That single sentence breaks the agentic shift.
But what if the authority figure is pushing back?
Then you have a different kind of information. A healthy authority respects thoughtful hesitation. A toxic one punishes it, and that distinction is itself valuable data.
That actually reframes some past experiences for me. I remember being in a meeting where my boss asked us all to commit to something I felt uneasy about. Everyone else said yes immediately, and I felt this incredible pressure to just go along. I ended up saying yes too, and I regretted it for weeks.
That pressure you felt is exactly what Milgram captured. And by the way, that's the fourth force we haven't talked about yet, social conformity. When everyone around you is complying, it becomes exponentially harder to be the one person who doesn't. Your brain reads the group's behavior as a signal that the situation is safe and normal.
So I'm fighting my own brain's survival instincts. The presence of authority, the gradual escalation, and the pressure of the group. That's a lot.
It is, and that's why understanding the mechanism is so important. Not so you can blame yourself for having been influenced, but so you can recognize the forces the next time they're operating on you.
Okay, so let me ask the question that I think a lot of people are wondering right now. Does this mean the Milgram experiment proved that people are evil?
No, this is the most common misunderstanding, and Milgram himself addressed this directly. He said the experiment did not reveal something dark inside people, it revealed something powerful about situations. He argued that the capacity for obedience is not a character defect, it is a necessary feature of human social life. Without some degree of deference to authority, society would not function. Children wouldn't learn from parents. Students wouldn't learn from teachers. Employees couldn't work under leadership. The problem is that this same mechanism, which works beautifully in healthy contexts, also works in harmful ones.
So the wiring isn't bad, it's just that it works everywhere, including places where it shouldn't.
Exactly. And I think the real gift of Milgram's research, once you sit with it, is not fear. It's humility. It's the recognition that if you were in that room in that situation, with those pressures, you might very well have pressed that lever too. And understanding that is actually liberating.
How is that liberating?
Because once you stop believing that only bad people do bad things, you start looking at situations differently. You ask better questions. You notice the pressure. You give yourself permission to be the one who pauses, and you become a little more forgiving of others who are caught in the same trap.
So instead of saying I would never do that, I say I need to be aware of when I might.
That's right. And if you want a deeper dive into this, I highly recommend reading Milgram's own book, Obedience to Authority. It is surprisingly readable, and the transcripts of the participant interactions are genuinely moving.
I'm going to check that out. But before we wrap up, let me ask you one more thing. What's the single most important thing I can do tomorrow at work to apply what we just talked about?
Pick one decision you have to make tomorrow where you feel some pressure to comply. And before you respond, ask yourself one question. If there were no consequences, if no one was watching, if I could not be judged for my answer, would I still feel okay about this request?
That is a powerful question.
And the answer isn't always going to be no. Sometimes the pressure you feel is just normal coordination, but sometimes it's the first step on a path you don't want to take. The question helps you see which one you're on.
I love that. Dr. Ann, this was one of those episodes where I feel like I just learned something about myself that I can't unsee in the best possible way.
That is exactly the feeling we're going for. Thank you, Zach. And thank you to everyone listening. If you recognize yourself in anything we talked about today, you're in good company. That's what the science is for.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe. We release a new episode every single day, and we promise you will walk away understanding something about yourself that you didn't know when you press play.
And if you want to support the show, share this episode with someone you work with. I promise it will spark a conversation.
See you next time.
Take care of yourselves. Bye.